Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Rachel and I am knitting. Not right now, but most of the time. And I have been knitting. Today's video is another installment of my FO Diary series, or Finished Object Diary series, which is basically a series of videos where I take you through the process of a finished object. I'll tell you about the pattern, I'll tell you about my knitting process, I'll tell you what I liked, what I didn't like, modifications I made, etc. So, as you may have noticed while I was doing that little intro monologue, I have put on a hat, and that is the subject of today's FO Diary video. This is an Oslo hat, sort of. Well, it is. It is. It is made following the Oslo Hat Mohair Edition pattern by PetiteKnit. Not only have I knit this pattern already before, I've also made an FO Diary video for this pattern before when I knit this hat, which again is still on my desk because I guess I'm just bad at cleaning up after myself. But this is made with souvenir yarn from my trip to Ireland, and it's my favorite color, purple. So yes, I do have a video going over this pattern already, but I knit it again and I did it a little differently. So I wanted to talk to you about the process of knitting this particular Oslo Hat Mohair Edition. Now, first of all, you may notice between these two hats, there are some obvious differences. Let me fold this brim up. Some obvious differences, most notably and most easily identifiable, are the differences in the yarn I used. The Oslo Hat Mohair Edition pattern calls for 1 strand of fingering weight yarn held with 1 strand of lace weight yarn, making a sport weight hat pattern. And that's what I did for this this purple one. I had 1 strand of townhouse yarn, lace weight, and 1 strand of Life in the Long Grass fingering weight held together. And for this Oslo hat, which I guess I should talk more about and focus more on because this is not the finished object we are diarying today. This one is. So for this also purple Oslo hat, I used 2 different bases from Treehouse Knits. I am an affiliate with Treehouse Knits, so my collection of Treehouse Knits yarn that is both gifted to me and that I purchased myself is quickly growing. So you'll probably see more and more and more and more and more Treehouse Knits yarn on this page. So just buckle up because it's all good stuff. But this particular hat is made with yarn that I purchased myself. So if that's important to you, let me just tell you, I paid my own money for this hat. Okay, so I used 2 different bases from Treehouse Knits. Both bases are in the same colorway. This is the In Bloom colorway, which was one of the colors from her favorites collection that launched in August of 2023. I did not get these skeins as part of the favorites collection pre-order. I ordered them after the fact when overflow skeins hit the Treehouse Knits website. So these were skeins that were dyed up extra. They weren't part of orders that were shipped out for the favorites collection. So I snatched these up. I got 1 skein of the Silky Bouclé fingering, and I have another skein here in a different colorway. This is worth fighting for, but I'll just show you the label so you can see the fiber content. This is 70% mulberry silk and 30% fine merino. It's 436 yards per 100 grams, and this is classified as a fingering weight, but as Lauren has mentioned, and as I believe also now after having knitting with it, this can bloom to a sport weight yarn. So you can use Treehouse Knits Bouclé for fingering patterns, equally for sport weight patterns. So I had 1 skein of the Silky Bouclé fingering in bloom. And then the crown of this hat, also in the colorway in bloom. This is knit in their base called Sierra Sport. I don't have the label in front of me, but I will put the yardage specs down here on the screen, or down here on the screen rather. But it's 100% superwash merino wool, the Sierra Sport. So this hat is silk and wool, basically. Now, when I was deciding what yarn to get from the Favorites Collection Overflow, I decided that I wanted to try the Bouclé. I hadn't tried the Bouclé yet. This is not a base that Lauren always offers. For instance, it wasn't offered in her most recent pre-order collection, which was inspired by The Office TV show, the American version. But anyway, I knew I wanted to try the Bouclé because in knitting up Cushy, who is back here in my mess of a workspace, in knitting up Cushy, I had used Bouclé from Cushendale Woolen Mills, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought, you know what? I want to try Treehouse Bouclé. So I ordered this in bloom Bouclé. And since I knew that the Bouclé could be subbed for a sport weight pattern, I also got Sierra Sport. I was kind of debating between if I wanted to get a fingering weight base of in bloom and hold it double for the crown, or if I wanted to do a fingering weight and a lace weight or what. But ultimately I decided to just get 2 skeins, one of each, Silky Bouclé fingering and Sierra Sport. Okay, so now I'm going to open up my knitting journal because I have a project page dedicated to this Oslo Hat Mohair Edition, fondly referred to as the Silky Bouclé hat. Silky Bouclé in bloom hat, according to my knitting journal. So in this knitting journal that I'm trying to get in the habit of using, I have the cast on date, the cast off date, the yarn I used, the pattern I used, the needles I used, and the modifications I did. So with all that preamble, now we can finally get into it. I cast this on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2024, and I cast it off on January 6th, 2004. So that's 5 days of knitting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess 6, right? Okay, 6 days of knitting because I count January 1st as a knitting day. I don't just subtract 1 from 6. Anyway, 6 days of knitting to make a hat. That's pretty good. I did not knit this exclusively during that time either, so it was a relatively quick knit. Now, the Oslo Hat Mohair Edition has some problems, I think, that I didn't really go over in my last finished object diary when I was talking about this version that I made. So I'll get to those in a minute, but they became apparent to me this time knitting it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. On January 1st, I cast on this hat using a provisional cast on. But not only did I just do a regular provisional cast on, I used barber cords or knit extension cords or stretchy cords. There's a lot of different names for them. Basically, it's hollow silicone tubing. This one is from Twice Sheared Sheep. I have an affiliate link for these and all other Twice Sheared Sheep notions in the video description if that's of interest to you. But I did a provisional cast on using these stretchy cords. The benefit of doing that is that when you are ready to pick up your stitches, and I'll just demonstrate with a random needle tip. This isn't even connected to a project or even a knitting cable. But let's say you have this provisional cast on, right? And you're ready to pick up the live stitches on your provisional cast on. You can simply stick the end of the tube on the tip of your needle, and then you can then slide the stitches from the tube directly onto the needle. So that makes picking up stitches for a pattern like the Oslo Hat or the Oslo Hat Mohair Edition much easier because basically, isn't this cute? Basically, you cast on the hat here. This is the cast on edge. And then you knit about 8 inches of this brim and then you fold it. So this is double thick, okay? It looks like it's around 4 inches, but it's really 8 inches because it's folded in half. So you pick up the stitches from your cast on edge, knit them together, and then continue onward in your hat. The reason that I wanted to do a provisional cast on is because, one, I thought that would make my life infinitely easier, not only because that's just a fact, but also because I was working with this bouclé textured yarn. If you haven't worked with bouclé before, basically the idea of this yarn is it has like a main thread in the center, and then around it are all these loops and this texture. Okay, it's kind of difficult to see, but the end result is it makes your fabric quite textured to the point where it's a little difficult to see your stitches and see your rows. You can kind of see the lines, the vertical lines that distinguish the columns of my stitches, but it's difficult to see true stitch definition. For instance, if you compare it to the Sierra Sport, you can see the stitches individually. The bouclé, it's not as easy to do. So I wanted to do a provisional cast on to mitigate the pain in the neck that textured yarn can sometimes cause. But when I was doing the provisional cast on, I initially did it with the bouclé yarn, but I quickly found out that was a really bad idea. So I used the Sierra Sport, which I have right here. This is what I have left over of the Sierra Sport, and this is what I have left over of the bouclé. But I used the Sierra Sport as my provisional cast on, and then once I did my cast on round, using my stretchy cords, my knit extension cords, I then switched to the bouclé and I knit the 8 inches in the bouclé yarn before joining the provisional cast on with the live stitches on my needles, and then moving forward in the Sierra Sport for the crown of my hat. Okay. So that's one modification I did. Other people have been doing this on Instagram. So this is definitely not something that I'm like claiming as a smart idea I saw other people do it and I was like, I want to be smart too. So that's how that came about. I use the same needle that the pattern calls for, which is a US size 3 or 3.25 millimeters. And I don't think I did any other mods. Well, not in the knitting process, at least. So, after I joined the brim, so it becomes double folded, I knit the turn, and I went on with my day and ultimately finished the hat, okay? That might not make sense to you unless you're familiar with this pattern or you've knit this pattern before. Now, when I cast off the pattern, this brim was quite loose, or maybe loose is not the right word, but it was, you know, the circumference of the brim was quite a bit wider than the circumference of the crown. So it made this look kind of saggy and like not the look I wanted. So after having cast off, I took some elastic thread. I'll link the spool that I use. It's like a couple bucks on Amazon. I think it's much cheaper if you get it at Joann's or you know, in person somewhere, but I've talked about this before on the channel. Like me going to Joann's happens once in a blue moon. So the convenience of paying like $2 more to order it online outweighed the, you know, convenience of having a lower price going in person to a store. Okay, so I sewed a line of elastic on the inside of the brim at the top. So you can see these two little white things here. I know it's hard to tell with the texture, but those are the elastic thread ends poking out. And yeah, you can kind of see it there. So again, it's so hard to see your stitches in this boucle yarn, but you can kind of tell that I tried to go every other column and just thread the elastic around the brim of the hat. Okay. Now, since the brim is double thick, I made sure to be extra careful that I was only picking up the inside layer, because I wasn't trying to sew the two layers of the hat together. Please focus on the boucle. I wasn't trying to sew the two layers of the hat together because I didn't want these little pops of the elastic thread to show on the outside of the hat when I was wearing it. So after I sewed that thread of elastic around the top portion of the brim, I tried it on and I was much happier with it, but it was still a bit, you know, too loosey-goosey for what I wanted. So I ended up sewing another line of elastic on the inside of the brim right underneath the turn. So I have two lines of elastic thread throughout this hat. One on the inside of the brim, so you can't see it here, but this is the like quadrant that it lies in. One goes around the hat at the top of the brim, and one goes around the hat at the bottom of the brim. So I think that gives it a much better snug look. This is much more what I was going for and what I was hoping for. Like I said, I haven't used Treehouse Knits boucle yarn prior to knitting this hat, so I didn't really know you know, what my gauge was, how much it would bloom, how much it would stretch, anything like that. So it was a total experiment, and this was a very low stakes experiment in the grand scheme of things, because it was only one skein, well, really only half a skein, if that, to see what I thought. Obviously the hat is done, and there are some things that I really like about it and some things that I wish were a little different. First of all, I really like how the texture works. I think it's so cute that the brim is this textured boucle and then the crown is just this smooth merino. I think it looks really pretty. I'm very curious about what a full boucle hat would look like, and I have two skeins of this purple, so I may experiment with that and see what I think. The experience of actually knitting with the boucle yarn is interesting because there are a lot of opportunities for fibers to get caught on your needle. It's not the same experience as splitting yarn, which you might be familiar with if you work with like yarn that easily splits, like maybe 2-ply or 3-ply, or I don't really know which one's split. In my mind, those are very splitty yarns, but you know, I digress. But there's a lot of opportunity for that to happen. So if that is something that really bothers you, keep that in mind before you try knitting with boucle yarn. Another thing is that because of the texture of this, it's very grabby, meaning any spot on my hands that are dry or like, I don't know, it just wants to grab onto it, which isn't the most like enjoyable feeling in the world. Like even now I can feel like the dry part of my finger just trying to like Velcro itself to this yarn. I don't love that feeling. So if that also bothers you, I would lotion your hands up before you start knitting. But it doesn't bother me in terms of how it touches my head, because the boucle really barely touches my head, because the inside of this brim, since it's really triple folded, it folds up onto the Sierra Sport portion. The boucle isn't really in contact with my skin. I think that it would be fine as a garment, because I don't know, maybe you're like this too, but my hands, especially in the winter, and my face are much drier than my arms or my stomach might be. So I think this would be fine as a garment, but you know, keep that in mind for when you're actually working with it if you have dry hands. That was a tangent. Okay, so some things that I don't really love about the finished piece, which you can see happening now. I don't know if it's because of the difference in bloom between the boucle and the Sierra Sport, or if it's just like the texture that makes it sit funny or differently. I don't know. But the turn of the Oslo hat doesn't automatically fold up into the hat. I have to make sure that I'm, you know, fussing with it a little bit to make sure that it's not sticking out and making me look silly. So that's kind of a new experience for me, whereas with my other Oslo hats, the fold just automatically stays put. With this one, it doesn't. So I have to be mindful of that when I put it on. See? So I would make sure to look in the mirror and stuff before I left the house if I were choosing to wear this on any given day. Something that I love about how this finished object turned out is that I discovered when I was messing around with it, if I kind of tinker with the brim a little bit more and kind of fold it in up on itself, it looks like not a bucket hat. I'm not sure what the hat type is called, but like the hats that they wore on 90s shows, like Blossom wears hats like this, Clarissa Explains It All, there's hats like this. Okay, so this is like nostalgic for me and I think it's super cute. Like imagine just a big old flower on there. I think I should probably add it. So I think that this will probably be my preferred styling of this hat. I think that it looks so cute. Not to say just having the brim as the pattern is designed for it to be isn't cute, but just having that little bit more like oomph to it, it's so cute. It just looks so cute. So I really like it that way. That's probably my preference, to have it like look more like a rolled brim as opposed to a folded brim. Oh, it's so cute. And I feel like doing that also secures the turn inside here and makes it a little bit more snug and tucked in. So I do like that. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the things that I did differently between the yarns that I used, the cast on I did, the elastic thread I sewed in. Now I want to tell you why I'm annoyed at this pattern in general. I know that I've talked before about the turn in this pattern and how it mystified me for a long time until I saw Leslie of Knit California do an explanation video, both on Instagram and here on YouTube, walking us through how to navigate that part of the pattern. And that was super helpful. And now, of course, that I see it and I know how it's done, it seems so simple. But I really don't think that the pattern does a good job of explaining how to do this turn. And really, I don't think it's actually a matter of not explaining it enough. I think it's a matter of like copy editing of where the additional information on this turn is located. So basically in the pattern, the instructions say you have the instructions for the brim and then joining the brim, and then you're supposed to knit like depending on the size, anywhere from like 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch, I'm not sure. But basically you knit a few rows and then you turn it. So it looks like on the finished object, when the brim isn't folded, it looks like you have a section, small as it is, of purling, but really there's no purling in this pattern, just knitting. And this purl section is an illusion and it's caused by turning your work. So basically in the pattern it says to work 3/4 of an inch, and then turn the work, so you're now working in stockinette, and do that for however many inches until you do the decreases. After that number, like the number for your size that you knit before you do the decreases, only then, what have I done with this hat? Only then does it say turn the work as if working a German short row. Now, it's in the same paragraph as the instruction to turn the work, that little clarifying blurb, but it's after the sequence of numbers. So, you know, if you're knitting a size large, you know, okay, knit this corresponding number of inches. So after that, like, that's the piece of instruction that you have in your mind that you're following. Like you're focusing on knitting 6 more inches or knitting 5 more inches or whatever the number is for your size. You will then, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, I'll look at the number that I need for my corresponding size and I'll think, okay, I can check out. I don't need to look back at the pattern until I'm ready for the next set of instructions. But for this pattern, it tells you the number of inches to knit. And then it says, oh, by the way, here's this clarification of how you were supposed to turn the work before you knit those 6 inches. So I think that simple reordering would really demystify the turn in this pattern. I think it's unfortunate that, you know, it is where it is in the pattern, because I think a lot of people are confused simply because the instructions for the turn are, in my opinion, not where they should be in the written pattern. Okay, so that's what I think about the pattern. That's a gripe that I didn't realize how to, like, I didn't know how to verbalize. I didn't really connect the dots until I was knitting it this time with this boucle yarn. So yeah, and it's not because of the boucle yarn that I, you know, realized this. I'm just saying this time with the boucle yarn to distinguish between this time that I knit it and this time that I knit it. Okay, there you go. So, yeah, there's the finished object diary for this edition of my Oslo Hat Mohair Edition. I didn't use mohair at all whatsoever. Changes that I would make if I were to do this again, which again, I may well do, is what I'm trying to say. If I make another boucle hat, specifically with Treehouse Knits boucle, I would size down, because here's the thing. I don't know if this is because the yarn blooms or because I was compensating all of the loops. Like, I don't know if I was overcompensating for a fear of catching yarn and catching fibers that weren't my stitches. So I might have been making my stitches looser. My gauge might have been looser than it normally is. So again, I'm not sure if it's because of how I was knitting or if it's because of the inherent characteristics of this yarn base. I don't know. But either way, if I choose to make another hat with this boucle yarn, I will size down. I think that will solve my problem that I needed to address by sewing in elastic. And I think, I don't know, I want to try it. So those are my thoughts. My review of this yarn is that it's a joy to work with, and I do look forward to working with it again, whether that is in hat form or garment form or whatever. But I'm glad that I did this one skein experiment so I can kind of dip my toe in the Treehouse Knits boucle world without being overwhelmed or, you know, biting off more than I can chew. For the leftovers of these 2 skeins, I was thinking of putting them in my sock machine and seeing if my sock machine likes it. Like, I don't know how it's going to handle boucle yarn, and I don't know how it's going to handle sport weight yarn, but I think that it can. Or at least I want to try. I'm thinking that it would be really fun to crank a few tubes and seam them together and make like a pillow sham. Like, can you imagine like alternating 20 rows boucle, 20 rows merino wool, and then like having rows so it's like a checkerboard basically of fuzzy and soft for like a pillow sham? I think that would be really cute. Or equally, a scarf that is like chunks of boucle, chunks of merino. I think that's a good idea. So I might try that with these leftovers. I kind of want to continue on the experimentation train in terms of this boucle yarn, because I know that the possibilities are endless. For instance, Lauren of Treehouse Knits, she is holding boucle as, I think, the main color for a colorwork sweater, and then using Spin Cycle as the contrast color. So it's like not only a beautiful color moment, but also a beautiful texture moment. The contrast between the smooth yarn and the textured yarn, and the contrast between colors. So yeah, I'm excited to continue learning more about bouclé, what I like about it, what I want to use it for moving forward. But in the meantime, very happy with my little, what are these hats called? I want to say like cloche. Is that a made up word? I don't know. If you know what this hat style is called, let me know. Isn't that so cute? It's like almost like a bowler hat, but without like the sordid history of people who wear bowler hats. I don't know. I just think of jerks in like Victorian dramas wearing them. Anyway, there we go. So, oh, also I just realized I'm wearing a sweater made in Treehouse Knits yarn. I really need to shave the pills off. Anyway, yay, Treehouse, go Treehouse. So that's all I have for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and hit that notification bell to be notified of my next upload. Last but not least, head over to Instagram and follow me at Rachel is Knitting if you don't already. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.